Everybody, we are officially live here on Facebook, and this will be a recording on YouTube for you guys. Tonight, I'm joined with fellow Positive Futures trainer, Abby. Hi,
Hello.
Abby. We're going to be talking all about little dogs because in the dog training world and the dog behavior world, sometimes our littles can get forgotten about unfairly. Sometimes people will chalk up certain behaviors to them. Oh, well, they're just a little, they've got the little dog syndrome or whatever. And that's certainly not the case. Our little dogs need and deserve all of the training and love that our big dogs get. But there are some special considerations that we need to take with our littles as we are training them in order to make sure that, we have a successful and good relationship with them. So Abby, before we get started, do you mind sharing a little bit about littles? Because you are one of our little dog experts because you share your life with the littles. And I think it's so important for the little dogs to have a big voice. So do you mind sharing a little bit about the littles that are in your life?
Yeah, definitely. So I currently have two small dogs. One of them is Phoebe, who I've had for a handful of years now, I would say. She's a foster fail. She has 3 legs, so she's a little tripod on top of being a little terrier chihuahua mix. She's got several other breeds in there. She's a super mutt. And she has her own little list of issues. She came to me pretty fearful and pretty reactive. She was showing a lot of the stereotypical behaviors that people like to write small dogs off as just having naturally. But we have worked through a lot of those behaviors, and she has made huge strides in recent years, especially in the past couple of years whenever I've gotten really serious about working with her reactivity. And she's just amazing. She's awesome. We plan on getting started with a little bit of barn hunt in the coming year. So she's going to have a couple dog sports under her belt. And then I also have Pocket, who is a more recent addition. She's also a foster fail, if you haven't noticed a trend here. I have not fostered a dog recently because of that. And she is, I believe she's a full Chihuahua, but I mean, there's no way to fully know. I have not DNA tested her. She's a darling. She's super sweet, super loving, super playful. She has a few fear issues, so she needs a little bit of help in the confidence department, but she's gotten really great at that. Both of them are my little adventure dogs now. We go hiking, we go to the park. I take Phoebe out, even though she's reactive, she's done really well. I take her out to patios and restaurants, and they pretty much do anything that any other dog can do. So I love them a lot. They're awesome.
I love that. So we just did a Friendsgiving hike, and we went up to Cloudland Canyon, and the littles were rocking it out and keeping up with my 2 Malamutes, a German Shepherd, and an Australian Shepherd. And I think that's great. I think a lot of our little dogs don't get out probably quite as much as they should. And they think, oh, well, they're little, like they're easy, and they're generally kind of advertised as like apartment dogs.
Yeah.
We'll just assume that means that they don't need the same level of training, enrichment, and exercise. And obviously that's not true. They still need those things.
Yeah, definitely. They're still very much so just dogs. I will see a huge difference if my dogs are not getting enough exercise and enough enrichment, because I've set that precedent for them in their daily routine. Right now, they're actually eating their dinner through some frozen Kongs over in the living room. So yeah, they have the same exact needs. I mean, I take them out for, I'd say, like 2 or 3 walks a day. We go, for a couple of miles at a time. They can go up to like 4 or 5 miles on hikes, and, they need their playtime. They need their mental stimulation. And it's really interesting whenever you start meeting a little dog's needs who has not previously had their needs met, how much their personality comes out, and how much you notice whenever you do not meet them, because they will let you know.
Well, and how much their behavior improves. We talk all the time with our big dogs when we, again, I'm the Nordic breed person, right? So I've got Malamutes, and I work with a lot of Huskies. And, we talk about how these dogs were bred for a purpose, right? And how if
Mm-hmm.
we don't meet these breed purposes, we see a lot of that energy
Mm-hmm.
coming out in undesirable ways. We see more attention seeking barking. We see dogs that are more on edge, more likely to be reactive through a window. And just because the dogs are little, right? They
Mm-hmm. You see
still
the
have
same
great
thing.
needs.
Yeah.
Some of these littles were bred to have a lot of, high intensity, lots of exercise needs. So we need to make sure that we're not just writing them off, that
Mm-hmm.
they'll get those outlets for that energy, because it will impact their behavior as
Mm-hmm.
well as their mental health.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of what I see a lot with Phoebe, especially with her reactivity, because she is multiple terrier breeds, and terriers are pretty high energy dogs. So she needs those exercise, those mental stimulation outlets, especially, or else I'll see, a rise in those reactive behaviors, just like I would, any other size dog. Um, she will do really great in barn hunt, I think, because she'll get a little bit of that breed specific outlet for her. It's really easy, especially with smalls, because they're really easy to control. They're not going to be able to drag you down the street. You're not going to break your ankle from them pulling you over from being reactive on a neighborhood walk. So it's really easy to just kind of ignore those behaviors and keep moving. But it's just really not fair on them in terms of their mental well-being, because they're going through a lot of stress and they're having really significant stressful experiences. So even though we can control them per se in those ways that would make somebody more inclined to seek training for their dog because they're scared they can't control their dogs, doesn't mean that they don't need the same training.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that a lot of times, when we talk about training and we talk about socialization for these littles, of course, socialization is going to be the same in theory, right? We
Mm-hmm.
want to take our puppies, so in this case, our small breed puppies, and we want to introduce them to the world in a very controlled manner,
Mm-hmm.
so that they're building positive associations. We really need to make sure, I see this a lot with clients, that they think that socialization is exposure,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not. Right? It's not getting them around other dogs. It's helping them build positive associations when they see dogs, when
Mm-hmm.
they hear dogs. And sometimes that means we're not meeting dogs, that we're just watching them from a distance. But the tricky thing with littles during our socialization is that they are so much smaller than a lot of the things
Mm-hmm.
in our world. And so we need to be extra cautious that something is not going to be overwhelming,
Mm-hmm.
or that a puppy they're playing with, even if it is a puppy, is not going to be so strong and overpowering that it's going to cause them physical injury. Like, yes, we still need to build those positive associations, but how we do that and what kinds of things we choose to interact with could be significantly different than I would with like a Great Dane puppy that's already, the size of a horse.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I feel like that's what I kind of see sometimes with small breed owners who are a little bit confused because they've gotten their dog as a puppy, and they feel like they've done the socialization and they took them out and they exposed them to new things, but they did follow that kind of, it's just simply exposure protocol to socialization. And so they've kind of left their dogs accidentally, of course, but they've left their dogs to kind of fend for themselves. And especially whenever everything is 10 times your size, it's a lot more intimidating. And we may not immediately understand, why one random object down the street is, concerning to our dogs and why they're so afraid of it. But because they're perceiving the world in such a different way because of the size difference, exposure like that can actually end up being very aversive, and it can actually have the same exact effect as not socializing them at all. And you may end up either way with a really fearful or reactive dog. So it's really important to make sure that you're exposing them in those really controlled manners, and just really making sure that you have like a good handle on the environment that you are putting your dog in while socializing them. Especially whenever it comes to things like cooperative care or handling or, going to the vet. Those things are stressful for all dogs, but it's like tenfold for smalls. It's just a lot. Yeah.
Well, and it's something too, when we're looking at body handling, of course, this is true for all puppies, but things like vet care, things like grooming, that's going to be part of their daily routine. And it can be more challenging to do some of those things with littles. And so we want to make sure that they're really comfortable with the process, and starting early on those foundations is really important to make sure that they will be successful later on. I think one of the hard balances that we can find with socialization for our smaller breeds is that we want to protect them, rightfully so. They are little, I've seen puppies that are like 3 pounds. Like, what do you do with that, right? We want to protect them because of that. It is in our nature to do that. But we need to make sure that we're not completely sheltering them from the world, because it's unfair for them to then only see this big world after that socialization window closes. So I love what you said, that we need to have a good grip of our environment. And that's true. We need to be very aware of what's going on around us because of their size difference. I think we also need to be very aware of how they are feeling, which obviously they cannot say, "Excuse me, I'm scared. I'm a little worried about this," but they can communicate that through their body language. So becoming really good at reading stress signaling and communication is going to be key, so that if another puppy comes up to your puppy, you'll be able to tell, yes, my puppy's happy, we're having a good time, or you know what, my puppy might be with their head dropped and their ears dropped, and maybe they're trying to hide behind me. That's probably not the most positive association, and so for our littles, I'm going to be very careful about what kinds of dogs they get to interact with, and the temperament of those dogs. I'm going to be much pickier about that, because something going wrong is, potentially more of a safety hazard.
Again, could be a serious injury. And that's kind of something that I have to keep in mind a lot with my dogs, especially whenever I'm out and about with them and things like that, because people, they're adorable. Like, I'm not gonna deny that. My dogs are very cute, and it's very easy to want to come up to them and interact with them, especially if they have a dog or they're a dog person. And I just kind of have to keep an extra eye on things like that, because, if somebody's coming up to me with a larger breed dog and they want to have an on-leash greeting with my dogs, I don't typically allow that, because it's generally not safe for various reasons. On-leash greetings just don't allow for really good interaction between dogs, especially strange dogs. But I just have to be really aware and really, kind of firm with people, in the sense that sorry, we can't interact. We're not going to say hi today. I know it's very, disheartening, but, and I believe you say that your dog is probably pretty friendly and social, but that's not the only thing that I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about my dog having good interactions with other dogs, especially because both of mine I got as adults, and they're a little bit more predisposed to those fearful behaviors. So even if the other dog does have good intentions, if they're larger and they're a little bit pushy, having those, well-intentioned interactions may not be perceived so well by my dogs. And so I would rather just avoid that entirely.
Yeah. Well, and I think that brings up a really good point, is that for the littles, we have to step up and be an advocate for them. Because there are some situations that might not be safe, or some situations where we know our dogs and we can say, this is a good situation for them, this isn't, and knowing what those moments might be, preparing yourself as a human for those. I generally do not like conflict of any kind. And so having to say no to people,
it's very uncomfortable. Yeah.
Or you can't pet my dog today for X, Y, or Z reasons. But making sure that you kind of mentally prepare yourself for that, maybe kind of script out a few responses of what you might say, so that in the moment when you need it, it comes naturally and easily for you. But, every dog is going to have their own boundaries. And so as a caregiver, knowing those moments when you need to step up versus when going to be a positive experience and a safe experience for your small breed dog.
And that's why I kind of feel like it's, doubly important for small breed owners to get really, really good at reading body language, because smalls are a lot harder to read, in the sense that they're farther away from us. They're closer to the ground. Their features are smaller and more understated. So those, more subtle communications, you see their muzzle tightening up, their ears flattening, or, their facial expression changing. Those are really easy to miss. And, the more we consistently miss those interactions and keep putting them through whatever is making them uncomfortable, and the more they're realizing those are not getting listened to, they're just going to escalate up the ladder until something works. And typically we don't really realize what they're trying to say to us until they're growling, snapping, and biting. And that's where we get kind of that, disconnect in communication, where we think that little dogs are really quick to react and have these big explosive reactions. But in reality, they've been communicating with us for a while. It's just that those communications haven't worked. Mm-hmm. So if we get better at reading that body language and having those two-way conversations with our dogs, then we're probably going to see a lot less of the need for them to escalate into those extreme reactions. So it's a matter of being able to read what they're saying to us before it gets to that point where it's really explosive.
I think that's huge. When we look at our small dogs that are barky, bitey, lungy, mm-hmm. people often have very different labels for them than they might a larger dog, like a German Shepherd, having those same emotions. And I think that sometimes it can be hard for people to kind of put themselves in their dog's shoes, which I think sometimes is really important. The world is a really big place for our small breed dogs. Mm-hmm. And if those communications of, hi, I'm uncomfortable, have been ignored, it's natural for a dog to escalate. Mm-hmm. They're going to raise their voice a little more and say, hi, I don't like that. Mm-hmm. And if we continue to ignore that, they're going to go further and, hi, I don't like that. Put their hand on you. And obviously that's really putting it into a human point of view. Yeah. But whispering, telling someone to stop doing what they're doing and they're not listening, I'm going to raise my voice. I'm going to start using my body in other ways. And that's what starts to happen with our littles. And I think with our smaller breeds, it can be easy for people to just go, oh, I don't like that. And they just pick the dog up and hold it or, move it across the street. Because again, like you mentioned, I'm not going to feel out of control holding a small breed at the end of the leash like I would with a German Shepherd. Yeah. But it doesn't mean that my small breeds emotionally
not feeling the same emotions. Yeah.
Yeah. That's huge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's kind of what I try to drive home to people, because, it's so easy to just pick them up and move them and, kind of ignore whatever they're saying. But in the long term, in terms of their mental well-being and our relationship with them, every time we, have one of those interactions where our dog is trying to communicate to us that they're uncomfortable and we ignore it and we just pick them up, scoop them up, put them somewhere else, or we ignore it, or we laugh at it because, it's funny, I guess, for some people to see their dogs have these big reactions because they know they can't hurt them. At the end of the day, you're damaging a relationship with your dog and you're damaging their confidence. And eventually it's going to become a problem behavior if it starts consistently happening. And then you've got a whole other, battle ahead of you trying to unravel all of those previous experiences with a dog who already feels like you're not safe. So it's really important to go ahead and recognize those behaviors as soon as you notice that they're happening and figure out why they're happening and put a stop to it. Yeah. That's why I like to generally take the route of being more hands-off with my small dogs. Mine are both very comfortable with being picked up, but I don't do it very often anyways, just because I don't want it to become a problem. And I have other tools in my toolbox for getting them to move or wherever they need to be without having to grab and manipulate them, especially whenever they're stressed. We can use, things like hand targets. We can ask our dogs to go to different stations. And obviously you can get really, really complex with all the different cooperative care routines you can do with your dog. Just honestly incorporating training. I know that's the big overarching theme here, but incorporating training routine with your small breed dog is going to make them so much happier with you, and it's going to get both of you on the same page so that you can communicate, and you're going to have to do a lot less of the grabbing and the manipulating and the, shoving them around or getting them out of the way or just carrying them away whenever they're having a big reaction, because you have, a set of communications in place and you don't have to get to that point in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we've got a couple people tuning in here. So if you guys have questions for us about your littles or comments, please feel free to drop those in the comments for us. You mentioned trying to be more hands-off with littles. And I think that's very true. I think in general, people think I can pick the dog up physically. So I'm just going to do that because it's the easiest way to get my dog out of the situation. But I think what they don't realize is that can create a lot of negative associations with you as a human. If every time your dog is stressed out or every time your dog has big emotions, I just pick them up and remove them. Me putting my hands on my dog can start to become something extremely uncomfortable for them. They can start to avoid me. They can start to show me unpleasant signaling.
Yeah.
And if my dog is stressed out enough and I touch them, that could be so startling that they'll turn around and then redirect on me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think people think, well, I can physically pick my dog up. That's easy. So I'm just going to do that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, that's not helping them and their emotions.
Mm-hmm.
You're not solving the problem. You're not helping them feel better about it. And when we can address those underlying emotions, that's going to change what their behavior looks like.
Mm-hmm. And I've seen it happen too, that, that added restraint of being picked up and held, and, they can't get away because they're being restrained against your body, can honestly make the stress worse, and it can make the reactions worse too sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing you mentioned, kind of that overarching trend of training, which I think is huge. And I think sometimes that training component doesn't get as much emphasis with our littles as it should, but they need the training just as much as the big dogs do. And they deserve the training just as much as the big dogs do, because as dog owners, whether we own large or small breeds, we need tools, we need ways to communicate with them, and we want them to be a part of the solution instead of just getting picked up and moved from point A to point B. So when you're working with littles, when you're working with clients or your dogs, are there certain skills you tend to focus on sooner rather than later?
I definitely try to focus on anything that has to do with, again, the hands-off theme. So, stationing, or anything that has to do with like asking them to move different places without having to pick them up. I always like to talk to my clients first about how things are going in terms of cooperative care. Because, like you said, a lot of small breeds are also long-haired breeds, so they have to go to the groomers regularly. And whenever you're regularly going to these places that are really, really stressful experiences for you, that just lowers their stress threshold over time. And, it's only going to get worse instead of getting better. Small breeds tend to also really need a lot of help in terms of like nail care and dental care and things like that, which is where cooperative care comes in as well. I also like to try and talk to my clients about, how they're actually using their food in terms of their daily routines. Because small dogs are small. Some of them, are only 3, 4, 5 pounds or so. We have like teeny, tiny littles. So obviously their stomachs are this big, and we only have a certain amount of calories to work with in a day. So we have to be really smart about training with food. You can obviously train with other rewards as well. That's, a given if you have a dog that enjoys toys and things like that. But food is the most accessible reward. So it's going to be a lot more convenient and a lot easier on you if you can train with food. So we talk a lot about incorporating their meals through enrichment. So instead of, stuffing Kongs with things that are just generally treats on top of feeding meals out of a bowl, we just ditch the bowl entirely and start feeding meals out of Kongs and food puzzles. Dogs actually enjoy that because they actually prefer to work for their food. If you give them a choice between free food and food they can work for, they will choose the food to work for. So that's a good way of making sure that we're not overfeeding them. Being really smart about cutting our treats down to really small sizes and using foods that are, generally nutritionally complete and balanced. You can get like kibble toppers and things like that from the pet store that actually could be fed as a meal because they have everything that a dog needs in them, and using those for training so that you can cut back their regular meals and still know that your dog is getting the nutrition that they need.
Yeah, absolutely. And finding those treats too that will cut up well, those meal toppers or those meal replacements that you're able to break up or dice into small pieces that kind of maintain that consistency, because you need to be able to deliver them. And I find that some, when you try to cut them up, will just crumble and it's a little less effective. Something that holds its form but still has that higher moisture content can be really helpful. We're not doing milk bones and big, large, dry biscuits. We're using something soft that we can, break into the smallest pieces possible for them, because we're going to need quite a bit to use throughout the day with them.
Yeah, and you can use lickable foods too.
Mhm.
That's something that I feel like people forget about sometimes, which, I mean, you can get canned dog food, you can get peanut butter, cream cheese, yogurt. And there's, those little travel sized bottles that you can get at like CVS,
Yeah.
that you're supposed to put your shampoo in and things like that. But you can actually get those.
This is for
Yeah.
training.
Yeah. And we can use those for dogs and fill them with soft foods. I find that to be a really good way to feed my dogs really small amounts, but the
Mhm.
food is valuable enough that they're really enthusiastic to work for it. Because
Yeah.
you can control how much they get. You just squeeze a little tiny drop onto their tongue per repetition, and you can make a whole bottle go over like multiple training sessions. So I
Yeah.
find that to be really, really helpful.
Yeah. One thing that if we rewind a second, you were
Yeah.
talking about building training cues and stuff for the dog.
Mm-hmm.
I think in addition to building a big toolbox, right?
Mm-hmm.
Having lots of ways we can get the dog's attention and lots of ways we can interrupt behavior and
Mm-hmm.
redirect the dog without having to put our hands on them.
Yeah.
I also always like to remind people of how they communicate with
Mm-hmm.
their small breed, because we are much larger. And if we are stressed and frustrated, and that comes out in our tone of voice, that can be extremely
Mm-hmm.
intimidating to a little dog, especially a little dog that has a soft temperament.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get dogs that don't want to work with us quite as well, or dogs that are stressed out by us being around. And so
Mm-hmm.
being mindful of our tone of voice, how we deliver our cues to our littles, where our feet are, how much we're stomping and running around, if we've got
Mm-hmm.
kids in the house, how much activity is going on. Like, there's a lot of other things that we need to be mindful about where the dog is and how the dog feels about it, because again, kids running around the house could be playtime for a larger breed,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where we're
Yeah.
tackling them, which we don't want. But for a little, the little can start to be worried about getting run over. And then we've got a dog that is, fear reactive towards
Mm-hmm.
kids. So just always being mindful about how the dog feels emotionally with how
Mm-hmm.
we communicate and how we kind of move around our house, because of course that's our safe space, but it's also a safe space for our littles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as a general rule of thumb that I like to follow, it takes a little bit of thought in the beginning because you may be in the habit of, just going to your dog, scooping them up, doing what you need to do because they are so easy to manipulate. But if you kind of adopt the mindset throughout your lifestyle with your small dog as letting them come to you instead of you
Mhm.
going to them, you're going to see a lot of your issues resolve. So instead of, walking up to my dog, facing them head on, leaning over them, I look like I'm 20 feet in the air standing over them like this to pick them up. I'll just get down or I'll kneel down and I'll pat my leg and ask them to come to me instead. Just
Yeah.
small little things like that don't seem like a big deal, but for our dogs, they do.
Mhm.
Anytime you can make something your small dog's choice instead of it being something that happens to them, it's something that they are signing up for. Like they're coming over to you for the interaction instead of you going and grabbing them and making them have the interaction. It's just going to do wonders for your relationship, and it's going to do wonders for their confidence because they feel like they're in control of the interaction. And
Yeah.
that's a big reason as to why we do see those kind of, problem behaviors, is because dogs feel like they're out of control and they feel afraid.
Mhm.
So it's just generally in general, if you can find any opportunity in your life to let your dog have the idea to come interact with you instead of it being your idea, take it. You're going to
Yeah.
see a huge boost in your relationship.
That's huge. I mean, they need to
Mm-hmm.
feel safe. They
Yeah.
can't learn, they can't be well behaved if they
Yep.
don't feel safe, if
Yeah.
they don't think they have choices. So giving them those choices is huge.
Mm-hmm.
And I love when you leaned forward and I was
Yeah.
envisioning myself as like your little dogs.
Like looking up at me. Yeah.
This monster's looming over me. Or contrary to that, the dog that's constantly just being scooped up,
Yeah.
unknowing.
Catapulted into the air. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
It can be very shocking. Mm-hmm.
yeah, absolutely.
Especially if you
And
walk up behind them and catch them by surprise and you're just
yeah,
grabbing them and scooping them into the air, and we see them lashing out as a problem behavior, but in reality, they're just afraid. They're taken
yeah,
by surprise.
yeah. Being mindful of that.
Mm-hmm.
Just because we can pick them up and move them doesn't mean we should.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that way, the less that you do it and the more hands off you are, and the better your relationship is with your dog, that they are, asking for your attention more than you are to them. In those situations where you really do just need to scoop your dog up in the air and get them out of a situation, if you're in some kind of, you're having some kind of issue, or you're walking up on somebody who, has a reactive dog that's coming to your dog, or any kind of emergency, if you just need to grab your dog and scoop them into the air and get out of there, because that's not something they've practiced very often, they're probably going to be more okay with it than if you're constantly doing it in non-emergency situations.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's like why we tell people to work on their recall a lot and pay it generously in training sessions. But I'm rarely actually using my emergency recall because, we're trying to set up that environment where the dog can be successful all the time. And then because we've built up a good history of reinforcement with it, when we actually need it, it's easier.
And you don't have the treats, they'll still, still come because they have that built up history with it.
Yeah. So small dogs are pretty popular, especially in the city where we've got, restrictions maybe on weight of dogs or breeds of dogs. In apartments and condos, they can be quite popular as well. And I think that oftentimes they're not taken out and about quite as much in the real world as they should be. And we talked a little bit about how that can create some behavioral problems. Creates a lot of emotional deficiencies. So when you're talking to small dog owners, how do you kind of help them understand the value and the importance of lots of training, enrichment, exercise when they think that, it's a little dog, it doesn't need much?
So it kind of depends. If it's somebody who already has a small breed dog and they are, it's an adult, they've had them for a while, at that point, we kind of are talking about things that may have gotten to this point if they're experiencing behavior issues, things that we're currently doing that are not very helpful. And then we're, building on alternatives, like a lot of the things that we've talked about here, letting the interactions be their idea, focusing more on cooperative care, focusing more on, specific training skills that are going to make their interactions with us a lot more cooperative instead of us, just forcing things upon them, talking about meeting their needs. And then from there, we're going to be doing a lot of confidence building exercises, because typically a lot of those behavior issues are stemming from a lack of confidence. Small breed dogs are, unfortunately, with how popular they are, because they are so great, and they are very convenient. There are tons of perks to having a small breed dog. Like you said, city living, apartment living, it is a lot easier to have a small dog over, a Great Dane in a 500 square foot studio apartment. So they do have tons of perks, but because they are so popular, they can fall victim to a lot of bad breeding practices. They're very popular with puppy mills, and they're very popular with backyard breeders because everybody wants one. And that typically sets dogs up to, from like a genetic standpoint, be predisposed to fear and reactive issues. So we need to make sure on the front end, if we are getting these dogs as puppies, that we're really, really heavily focusing on very structured socialization, and socialization that is pairing these new novel experiences with something good, rather than just simply exposing them to things, because that is leaving them up to determining how they feel about it without us showing them that they can feel good about and exploring new things and being confident. So if we're talking about a client that, is getting a new puppy, we're going to focus really heavily on socialization, probably even more so than any other dog, because we need to make sure that those situations are very controlled.
Ditch the sit, ditch the
stay. The obedience can come later.
15-year-old dogs can learn that, but some of the things that have a time limit to them.
Yes. Yeah. So that's going to be our number one priority whenever I'm working with, small breed puppies, is, starting those kind of foundational behaviors that are going to make sure that they're confident through life, and that they can cope with new experiences, and they can cope with handling, and they can cope with being left alone, and they can cope with seeing things that they've never seen before. Because there is a very systematic way of going about that. And with smalls, we have to be, extra cautious that we're not putting them through anything that they may perceive to be aversive.
Right.
But yeah, with adult small breeds, we more so go in and look at, kind of their daily routine, what they're doing that maybe could be done better, and helping them figure out ways that their dog is communicating with them that they're not picking up on. And then from there, helping them, find a more cooperative routine with their dog, and also showing them ways in which they can meet their dog's needs, even though they are in that tight space, they are in that, high-rise apartment. There's still plenty of things that you can do for your dog that will help them meet their needs and help them have a better disposition, because they're not lacking anything in terms of like exercise and enrichment.
I love that. Now, these are some things that you're going to be going over in your upcoming webinar,
Yes.
which is how to live with small dogs better, how to be small dog savvy. So talk to our viewers and listeners about what they can expect from that webinar.
So yeah, we are going to go a little bit more in depth about the topics that we've covered here. Some of these are kind of, teasers to the webinar. So we're going to talk a lot about training with food. We're going to talk about building food drive. We're going to talk about intelligent ways to use food with training and enrichment. We're going to talk about cooperative care, because I've brought that up a few times here. We're going to get a little bit more in depth about that and show you what it looks like. We're going to talk about, equipment choices, things that you kind of need to look for and things that you need to avoid whenever you have a smaller breed dog. Advocating for your dog in the real world. That's something that's really, really important, because, we can only get so far in our training if we are not upholding those standards of respect and care for other people whenever they are interacting with our small dogs. And we're going to, learn a few different training exercises. I'm going to show a few demos on there. So if you guys have any issues with a small breed dog who needs a little bit of confidence building, or you need to see what cooperative care looks like in terms of like grooming and handling, we're going to have a lot of video demos on there. It's like half of the webinar is videos, so you will get plenty of demonstrations. If you sign up for it to watch it live, you're going to get 2-week access to a private Facebook group where you can practice the exercises and the demos on your own dog that you see in the webinar. Post those videos in the Facebook group. I can give you some professional feedback if you are having any trouble or you're not getting the results you're looking for, or if you just want to show me how great everything's going. I also want to see that too. I always love seeing successes. You can ask me questions. So you'll basically have 2 weeks of access to pick my brain, show me whatever you have or whatever you're working on that you're struggling with, and I can give you some feedback and some tidbits to help you progress.
Yep. And we have included a link to that webinar here in the description to the video. So you guys can head over. If you happen to be catching this much later, past our webinar date, there will be a recording available, but you will not get access to the special group. So you'll need to consult maybe on a virtual basis, do a virtual private lesson or something like that, that feedback. But, I think that feedback's so important, because especially when we're working with our littles, small mechanical changes on what we are doing as a trainer or a dog owner, training a little dog can make a huge difference, in changing how I'm presenting a treat, how I'm moving my hand around the dog, how I'm presenting a target, all of these things can make a big difference. And, as a professional, we're able to analyze that and say, you know what, I'm seeing a little bit of a stress response when you're doing this, try switching that. And those small changes make a big difference in terms of success when we are looking at our training programs.
Especially with littles, all the communication is very subtle.
It is.
So, yeah.
It is. Yeah. And so being able to pick up on that's a bit of an art. It takes a little bit of time to learn.
It does.
So for people who might be watching that either are currently raising a small breed puppy or maybe have an older small breed dog that they share their life with, any kind of last minute tips that you want to leave them with?
I think honestly, just putting a little bit more emphasis on trying to figure out what your dog wants from you instead of what you want from your dog is always going to, boost your relationship and your training progress. Just adopting that lifestyle of let your dog come to you, let things be their idea, try to focus a lot with your small breed dog, especially if you have one that is showing, reactivity or fear issues. putting a lot of focus on rewarding what they're doing well and building up their confidence that way, the more that we are, celebrating the wins, rewarding the wins with them, and, helping them through, having that mindset of I need to help my dog through this issue instead of I need to correct my dog or my dog is being bad, viewing it as my dog's having a hard time, my dog needs me to help them, is going to do wonders for their progress. It's going to do wonders for your relationship with them. Just focusing a lot more on, building them up as opposed to focusing on what you're seeing that you don't want from them. Especially even from puppies, because puppyhood is so important with small breeds. I mean, with any dog, but with small breeds especially, because those associations that they make are going to stick with them for life. So the more that you can be safe for your small dog, the more that you can be a source of, reinforcement, and you can be a source of comfort and safety for your dog, the better off they're going to be in life in general and with your relationship with them.
Yeah, that's huge. I think the one thing I would add to that would be that just because they are little doesn't mean that you have to put up with X, Y, or Z.
Absolutely.
Or that being little is not, an excuse for your dog doing X, Y, and Z. I think a lot of people, with our bigger breeds, we get different labels than we do with our littles, but labels in general are harmful. And I find that people will label their dog in a certain way, their small breed dog, and then that prevents them from having a really good relationship with their dog. And it also prevents them from, putting in the work that they need and that their dog needs in order to make progress.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's being small is not an excuse for sure. They're still feeling the same exact feelings that, a 125-pound Mastiff would be feeling if they were having a pretty large reaction to something. So we need to take it as seriously as we would with a dog that would have the potential to seriously harm us, even if they can't. So those behavior issues definitely need to be addressed, regardless of size, just because it's a welfare issue, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Abby, for hanging out with us and sharing some of your small dog knowledge. I always love listening to you talk about your littles and seeing with them, because it's
I will talk about them all day. So yeah, that's no problem.
They are worth it. Well, again, for anyone tuning in, we will drop those links to the webinar if you guys want to learn more from Abby and get some customized coaching for 2 weeks following that webinar recording. And we will both keep an eye on this chat for the next 24 hours or so. So if you guys are catching up later and have some questions, please feel free to drop those in the comments section and we will get back to them. All right, everybody. Have a good night.
All right. See you later.